A little bit quickly, maybe just list rather than go into some things too much. But we're going to continue on the health portion of stewarding our health. We talked last week about stewarding our health a little bit. We're going to continue on that. Some things may be repetitive. We may say some of the same things that were said last week, but I think there's a different approach. And as I was studying and going through some books and just praying about it, this thought it's not original. It's not my idea or my thought, but this concept was kind of eye-opening to me in a way. It's logical and really pretty simple, really, but something that I struggle with, something that we probably all struggle with. But we're going to talk about the two things today are margin and rest. So margin and rest, and all rest is self-explanatory. We'll talk about margin here in a minute. But we'll go to Mark chapter 2, verse number 24 is where we're going to start. And we'll go to a couple other places as we go through. I'm just going to read this so that we kind of have an idea of where we're going, and then we'll get to it here in a second. So Mark 2, verse 24 says, "The Pharisees said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful?" So this is the Pharisees talking to Jesus about his disciples eating corn and doing things on the Sabbath day. And he said to them, Have ye never read what David did when he had need and was an hungered, he and they that were with him? How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat but for the priests, and gave also to them that were with him. And he said unto them," and this is the part we want to focus on and think about, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." So thinking about us and our rest and needing rest, and we're talking about stewarding our health, and we live in a world, we live in a time where we're busy all the time. There's always something to do. There's always something to fill literally every moment of every day if we're not careful about it. And the term that is used here in the studying that I'm doing is overloaded. We can become overloaded with just stuff and responsibilities, things that are necessary, overloaded with bills, overloaded with work, overloaded with relationships. There are a lot of things. And every generation has had their burdens to bear and their difficulties, right? You think about the World War II generation. You think about the things that they had to go through and had to bear that we've never had to deal with, right? In our generation, we've never had to suffer through a depression. We've never had to go to war, to see our sons go to war. We've never had to deal with those types of burdens, but we have different and unique burdens that we have to bear. And, they'll look back, if the Lord tarries, 60, 70 years back to where we live and talk about the struggles that our generation dealt with. But if we look at 2022 today, in the time period we live in, I think one of the most pressing problems that we deal with or struggles that we can face is being overloaded. And overloading, our entire society is that way. And so as I was going through it, they listed, I think, 19 different areas of life that we can be overloaded in. And it may be all of them for us. It may be some of them. You're going to have a few that definitely apply to you. And some of them are kind of redundant, but I'm just going to read through these here real quickly. Just what I'd like you to do is rather than hear a list, just think about your life, right? And that's the goal here for these types of lessons. I'm not an expert, right? I'm not going to sit here and give you, do this and this will work, if this will help. I'm just saying, as I have done, just think about your life. Think about where you're at right now and the things that you struggle with, and be honest with yourself, right? And the things that maybe we can do better at. Because again, the goal for us in our health is to be in the best health we can be in so that we can serve the Lord to the best of our ability. Right, to be able to do as much for him, which means taking care of your children, taking care of your family, serving here at church, and other things like that. So as we go through these things, that's kind of the goal I'd like you to do. So overload, activity overload, right? We often book ourselves weeks in advance, right? I mean, sometimes even our work schedules are done weeks in advance, and we schedule things between the work schedule. We think way ahead often on things that we have to do. And that's good, right? Planning is a good idea. But sometimes we squeeze in as much as we possibly can, and we miss the now in anticipation of the then. Right? We miss what's going on today, and that's why you see all these people at 4th of July fireworks, and they got their phones out. Instead of just watching the fireworks, they're recording the fireworks to watch later or show their friends what I was watching through my phone. Whatever, I don't have a problem with that, but that's kind of the idea. The now we kind of lose for anticipation of what's coming. Change overload. Nobody likes change, but if you think about the change, how rapidly things change this in 2022. If you go back to the 20s, things didn't change quite as quickly as they do today. Things happen quickly and change quickly. Choice overload. In 1980, there were about 12,000 items in any given grocery store. Today, over 30,000. So more than double the options in 40 years that you can get at a grocery store. So we're overloaded with choice. Commitment overload. You have to be all things to all men all by yourself. Right? We all can fall into those types of scenarios. Debt overload. Yikes. Decision overload, and that kind of goes with choice overload, but we have more decisions to make and less time to make them, is what it feels like. And sometimes we put ourselves in those positions. Expectation overload. Because of technology, you have to be available at all times, all day, all hours of the day, and all hours of the night. You need to be available, or you expect people to be available, right? Expectation overload. Fatigue overload. We run ourselves so hard and so long, eventually you just hit a wall. Hurry overload. Gotta go fast. Even if you're Sonic or not, Sonic's terrible, but gotta go fast. Sorry, Corey. He's about to throw something at me. You gotta go fast. Everything's hurry. Gotta get here, gotta get there, gotta get the kids here, gotta get home by this time, gotta get over there, gotta get to bed by this time, gotta get up at this time. Hurry overload. That was hilarious. He just points at me. Information overload, right? I mean, the internet, wow. Information overload, media overload, noise overload, people overload, possession, technology, traffic, work. I mean, we could go on and on with all the things that in our life can be overwhelming, and that's the society we live in, though. And we're kind of on the low end of that spectrum because we live in South Dakota, but you're also in the biggest city in South Dakota, so you still feel a little bit of it. But if we lived in New York or if we were in Chicago or some of those, I mean, it's just even more so, right? So we all have different ways of coping with the overload, right? And we all have different areas in our life at different times in our life that we do feel overloaded or overwhelmed. And sometimes we know that we're being overloaded. Sometimes we're aware of it and we still have to deal with it. Sometimes we don't know, though. Sometimes we're completely unaware that some of the problems we're facing or some of the issues we're having are because we have overloaded ourselves in an area or overburdened ourselves in places, and we don't know it. And we won't know until the cart tips over because we overloaded it so full, all of a sudden the cart tips over. We're like, what happened? And we don't realize it's because we just overloaded that area of our life. So regardless of how or where you are or what areas that you have, being overloaded does affect your health. It affects your stress level. It affects your ability to function at peak performance, right? Which is what we want. We want to be able to be in the best health that we can be to perform for the Lord, to do things for the things that are important to us and things that matter. Sooner or later, we will, if we continue living that life, sooner or later you encounter physical depletion and mental exhaustion, right? Moms know that, especially moms with littles. That's, you hit that wall and it's like everyone give me a 10-foot radius. Anybody within this radius is about to lose their life, right? And everyone, so if you're smart, you better back away. Go to your room. And, we've all been there. And that's hitting that wall, right? Just physically depleted, mentally exhausted, and you're ready to snap, right? So how do we as Christians manage the overload? Because we're not exempt just because we're Christians, right? Because we accept the Lord as our Savior doesn't make us exempt from living in this world. So the two things are margin and rest. So margin is created as we schedule, and this goes back to last week, according to our biblical priorities. So the things that only you can do because you're the one that does them, that God has given you to do. Also known, you're your wife's husband. Only you can do that, right? So as we schedule our life, according to biblical priorities, margin is created, and we have to create that margin. And then rest is really, and I like this definition, I didn't come up with it, but rest is our affirmation that the priorities God placed in our life is sustainable, right? The things that God has given us as priorities, things that are our responsibilities, it is sustainable through Him to do those priorities. But that requires rest. That means that you can take a break. That means you can stop, and the world will not end if you stop something. The work will remain. You'll still be able to do it later if you stop right now. It doesn't have to, you can't, it's the idea of where I got to do it. Once I'm done, then I'll rest. Once I complete it, then I'll rest. Sometimes that's applicable, sometimes that's doable, but sometimes it'll still be there when you're done, and sometimes you need the rest. So, margin. Think about Jesus' life here on this earth. Okay, think about the life he lived. Probably, I don't know. He's probably the most productive person to ever live. Right? Got the most accomplished, did the most in his short amount of time. You can look at all the big corporate people that have created things and all the productivity they have. And sure, they have productivity. But as far as eternal things go and the actual physical things that he did on this earth, he was probably the most productive working person ever. But we never see in Scripture him hurried. We never see him overloaded. We never see him frenzied. We never see him stressed, ever. When you say, well, that's because he's God. Yes, I believe that is true, but he also was man. He also dealt with the things we deal with. And think about all the people that demanded his attention. You think your kids demand a lot of attention from you. What about the entire city? What if the entire city of Sioux Falls demanded your attention? That's how Jesus was. The entire area that he lived in, once he started healing people, and doctors weren't what they are today. Can you imagine if we had the same medical system that they did then, and you were able to heal people from diseases that that would kill them? They all wanted his attention. They demanded his attention. But again, you never see him hurried. You never see him overloaded. So on top of healing and all that attention from an entire city and region, he also preached. Right? He also mentored a group of men in his circle. He mentored his disciples. He healed. He ministered to people. And yet he did it all with a loving, a giving, and calm manner. You never see him losing his temper. You never see him stressed or frustrated or angry at people. It was deliberate. Right? He did it lovingly, gave of himself, calmly, deliberately. So how do we, 2,000 years later, live a more driven, more hurried life with less stakes really to deal with? Right? We're not saving the world. We're not saving humanity. How do we live now with less to deal with, more technology to help us do more things, but still we're more hurried, we're more stressed, we're more driven, we don't, what do we have to show for all the busyness, right, that we deal with? And the problem that we just go, and the overloaded part of it is because we don't have margin. We don't have the space between our load and our limit. And that's what margin is. Margin is the space between the load that you carry, the responsibilities and priorities that you fulfill, and your physical, mental, spiritual limit. That's margin. And often we live right up to the line. We live right up to our limits. Right, where when something goes wrong or something unexpected comes up, you're over the limit. You've passed beyond your margin because we've not given ourselves the space that when things happen, something comes up, you can deal with it without being over the limit. We do it in our budgets, right? We give ourselves an emergency fund so that when things come up, you're not dipping into your mortgage payment in order to take care of the emergency. Right? We do that in finances, and everyone's like, oh, yeah, I get it. It makes sense. Right? It might be hard to do it. You may struggle with it, but you get the logic there. But then we live our life without margin. And we live our life right up to the line. In any area, any one of us, we all have that, whether you're a mom, whether you're a dad, a student, and a mom and a dad, an employee, an employer, whatever roles that you fulfill that are your responsibilities, we need to have margin set up that allows us that grace period, right? So margin, the space between our load and our limits, the amount allowed beyond that which is needed, right? There has to be a margin there. The gap between rest and exhaustion, that's the margin. So when we live right up to the line and emergencies come up, as they always do, there's no space and we just go off. And what happens is we end up living on adrenaline. We live with less sleep. You get up earlier, you stay up later, right, to get the things done that you need to get done, and you miss out on the rest, you miss out on the things that you need to replenish yourself, and you live on adrenaline, and we've all been there. And kind of taken away from later, there will be times in life where you will be there, right? There'll be seasons of life where that's required, right? For me, for my work now, it's pretty easy, right? with the restaurant and ice cream. For some reason, people think ice cream and they think cold and they stop eating ice cream as often, which is dumb. But whatever. That's what people do. And that's been proven. And year after year after year, this time of the year, we get quieter. January to February are our slowest months of the year. So I have a bigger margin as far as stress and work goes. Become June, July, August, September, May, June, July, August, September, with the work stress and margin shrinks quite a bit. Because it goes. And I know that, and you prepare for that, right? So in your life, there's something similar. And there may be seasons where you're a little out of balance. You're working up to the margin in this area, and you know that, and you do it on purpose, though. And you do it for a short while, and you get it back to balance where you need to be. But we live up to that margin all the time. We push harder. We work faster. We call it intensity. Right, that's our name, that tag that we give it so that it doesn't look like we're just being bad stewards of ourselves. We say, no, we're just intense, we're driven, we're purposed, maybe not wise, but those are the words that we use, and we don't give ourselves margin. 1 Corinthians 10:13, go there. 1 Corinthians 10:13, you probably know it. It says, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you're able, but will, with the temptation, also make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Now, we look at that and we think about temptations or things that we're tempted to do wrong. But the thought process here is that God, again, and this goes back to what we talked about last week, God sustains everything we do. So if you have responsibilities, if your job is stressing you out, if your kids are stressing you out, if your relationships are you're overloaded by those things, God does not give us things that we cannot handle with His help, right? He will help us get through and sustain every responsibility that we have. So yes, when it comes to temptations, for sure, God will help us get through and escape those temptations. But God also gives you a way of escape your overburdened and overloaded life with rest and margin. He helps us in every aspect of our life, not just the temptations, but in the relationships. You have a struggle, you have a rough relationship in your life, strained relationship. God can help you through that, right? God will give you the rest and the help that you need to get through that. You have a rough work life right now, whether it's the people you work with or the job you're doing or the lack thereof, whatever the case may be. God knows He will not give you a responsibility or a priority that He will not help you with. God does not give us more in life than we can handle. With Him, everything in life is more than we can handle if we try to do it all by ourselves, right? But with Him, He gives us a way of escape. So how do we set this margin? Again, think about the demands Jesus had placed on His life while He was here on earth. We talked about them. But if you just put this to seek and save that which is lost, that's a pretty high demand, right? And continually on His mind were people's souls. Continually on His physical body were people searching healing, right? Multitude, literally the word is used, multitudes thronged Him. So much when the lady touched the hem of His garment, there were so many people around Him. You think celebrities are thronged today. Everywhere He went, that happened. Teaching, loving, serving. He could have pulled all-nighters continuously, right? He could have stayed up all night long healing people, preaching, teaching, reading. He could have done all-nighters all the time. How did He determine how to spend His attention? And that's what we need to look to as Christians. How did He replenish Himself from all that giving? It's physically exhausting. It's physically exhausting. You get a sick kid, one sick kid for a week or a few days, it's exhausting for you to care for that kid. Now have hundreds or thousands of people demanding to be healed and taken care of. Imagine the stress and then the fatigue that He had. So how did He replenish Himself so He can continue? Because He did this for 3 years straight, right? He did that for 3 years. Number one thing He did, if we look at Jesus' life, the number one thing He did to replenish Himself and to give Himself margin is He spent time with His Father. It's the number one thing. And I know as Christians, and if we asked, we maybe wouldn't be honest, but we'd say we have devotion times, we have our times alone with the Lord, and we schedule it, and that's good, and we should have those things. But I bet when we get further, when our margin shrinks and we get closer to the line of our physical or emotional or mental exhaustion, we don't increase time with him necessarily. Maybe we do, and we should. And that's the thing Jesus did. He spent time with his Father alone. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus seeks quiet solitude so that he can hear his Father and also enjoy the fellowship. Right? If our time with the Father is always asking him for things, and that's like we read our 3 chapters a day, and that gets us through the Bible in a year, and then we ask the Lord for our list of needs and wants, and that's the end of our devotion time. Are we really spending time with him? Right? If your kid came to you and just asked you for a bunch of stuff, and then it was like, all right, I'm out, you'd be like, okay, we didn't spend no time together. You just came and asked me for a list of things and left. And I think we treat God that way sometimes. We treat our Father that way. We say, okay, I'm checking my list of reading and spending time, and then I'm going to ask you for all the things I need. I may even ask you for things to help other people, right? So it's not just me, it's other people. But then do you ever just like talk to him? I know that's weird because he doesn't respond audibly back to us. But you ever have a conversation with the Lord that's more than just asking for things? Do you ever spend time with him? If your husband did that, wives, if you went out to eat and he's like, all right, here are the things that I need done at home. I need this cleaned. I need this made. I need my lunch for here. And then if you could change the oil in the car too. And the kids need stuff. The kids need new clothes. And then they're going to need breakfast tomorrow. And if you could please, you're the best. You're just the best, honey. I'm just telling you right now, I love you so much. I need my shoes signed. And if you could pick out my church outfit tomorrow, again, you're the best. I love you so much. I'm so grateful for you. If you could just do those things, that would be great. Okay, I got to go now. So enjoy dinner. See you later. There'd be divorces happening the next day. Like there'd be confrontations. There'd be arguments or engaged conversations, whatever you want to call it. It wouldn't go over well. But I think we treat God that way a lot. I think we sit down and say, oh, I need all these things, Lord. You're the best. I love you so much. I'm so grateful for you. But if you could help so-and-so, that would be awesome too. And just, I need this, Lord. And I'm not trying to belittle our needs, and I'm not trying to minimize the struggles that we have in going to the Lord and helping us. I'm just asking you to look at, if it were a human being that you were sitting across a dinner table from, would the conversation go a little differently? He wants you to ask him. He wants to bear your burdens. He wants you to tell him where you struggle. He loves you and loves us and wants to know those things. But I'm just saying, maybe we should give him a little bit more than just all the problems we have. Maybe we just need to talk to him and honestly tell him how much we love him and how we're grateful for him, and not just like a formal prayer, like praying in church, right? We have those that are asked to pray. Sometimes you have the checklist of things I got to say. Don't mess up any words. Say the things are right. But it's almost more for show, and we try not to be. You want to pray to talk to him, but when you're praying in front of everyone, it's a little different. And sometimes I think we can get in our personal relationship with him and pray like we're praying in front of people. And it's a personal thing. It should be heartfelt. There should be more to it. And that's what Jesus did. They talked. Now, he was God, and so his relationship was a little different, but we can emulate that. We can emulate the way he just spent time with his Father. That's how he replenished himself. And again, it's supernatural, right? God is eternal. God is all the omnis, right? And he can do things for us that other human beings can't, just by talking to him, just by spending time with him. And so we need to engage in that fellowship. We need to engage in that relationship, because the answer to overload is not to work harder or even to work smarter. It's God, right? To comprehend that what Jesus has done for us, be aware of his grace in our life and the priorities that he's given us, we can do with his help. So we need to schedule that margin. And how we do that is we need a center around which to fill our lives, right? So if you're going to schedule margin, if you're going to actively on purpose, because hopefully, again, you're thinking about your life, your day, your week, how things look, how much margin you have, if you're honest with yourself. How do we do that? And the way to schedule margin is you got to have a center, right? You got to start at the center, something around which everything else revolves. So when it doesn't apply to your center, you say no to it, right? You minimize the priority because you can't say yes to everything. When things don't fit into that sphere of priorities that go around what's at the center, you say no. So what is at the center? And you answer that question by saying, what has God called you to do? Whatever God has called you to do in your life on Sunday, the 27th, What has God called you to do today? What is he asking from you? That is your center. That's your center. Okay? And when you start there and you realize the center of your priority list, the center of what God has asked you to be, that's where you start with the highest priorities. And so that's going to start with you being a Christian. That's going to start with you telling others about him. That's going to start with you being a husband, with being a wife, with being a mom, with being a dad, right? With being a church member, a friend, and you're going to go out and out and out for all the priorities that are what God expects you to be. But always remembering what the center of that is. And so if it doesn't fit into that sphere, if it does, you can't over-prioritize. You can't say, I need to take the kids to soccer, and it over-prioritizes church attendance. Right? If there's a soccer game on Wednesday night, soccer gets pushed out, and church attendance goes there. Right? If something is trying to over-prioritize over your wife or over your husband, then you have to make the choice. And sometimes that's work, sometimes that's other family members, sometimes that's friends, sometimes that's kids. And you have to make the decision based on your center and creating a margin that, no, this goes outside of what this is because that's a higher priority. So you have to find out what that center is. What has God called you to do? What are his priorities and his will in your life? So a few ideas that I have. I think I have four here that you can put in there, and it's going to be different for everyone, but these are four I think applies to everybody. Number one priority, walk with him. Right? No amount of Christian service, Christian activity, Christian doing replaces that relationship. And we kind of already talked about that. Number two priority is your family. So God is first, your family is second. So that these are pretty tight. It's hard to fit something in between those priorities, right? That's a pretty tight circle there. Your family is next. No one ever at their deathbed says, I wish I spent more time with my boss. Unless your boss is your dad, then I would say that, but most of the time, in most cases, no one says, man, I wish I had spent more time with Karen over in accounting. She's just the best. Should have spent more time with her. No, it's your family. You wish I spent more time with my brother, my dad, my mom, my kids, whatever the case may be. Your care for your family is number two. Work is important, right? God does tell us to labor while we work and to do all the work that we do. And I'm not just saying the clock in, clock out work, but the work in your life. Everything you do should be done like you're doing it for him, right? He tells us that in Ephesians. Your job, your work, the things you physically do, they're a gift, right? God gives us the gift of health and the gift of jobs physically and the gift of being able to work. It's a gift that we need to use wisely, but it needs to be in the correct priority. Work diligently, work as though you're working for him, but give time and margin for the other priorities in life. Next, worship or serving God, right? So you've got your relationship with him, and that's different than serving. That's different than worship. You have your relationship with him, you have your family, you have the life that you're called to live, the responsibilities, the bills you pay, the good citizenship that you offer, right? That's part of what God is expecting you to do. And then your service, the worship and service of him. Church and church service shouldn't be the first things cut. And the book I was reading, a couple of things, one of the guy has been doing this for a long time, said when people look to cut things to create margin, to give themselves space, a lot of times first thing that goes are some of the church stuff. The extracurricular church activities, the Wednesday night service, the Sunday night service, whatever. They find the things and they're like, well, that's not as important. They cut those to give margin. Don't cut things that are service related for God in order to give yourself time off, right? That's a little bit of backwards thinking. But looking for margin, how do we spend time in the pursuit of these priorities that I just mentioned? If you were to look at your life today, daily, weekly, how is your life spent, stewarded, in pursuit of those priorities? Those four that I mentioned. And again, you're going to have other ones that fit into there. But when you think of your life this week, how much time was spent in pursuit of your marriage? That priority. Or was it taken for granted? I've been there. I've done that. Right? Where I just say, yeah, I'm married. But what did you do this week to actively pursue that priority in your life? To improve that relationship? Or did you just go with the flow and coast and all these other things demanded your attention and living up to that margin, and that one kind of got pushed by the wayside? Do we schedule time weekly for activities that are directly related to your priorities? Again, there will be seasons of life that will pull you slightly off balance, right? You may not be able to spend as much time with your kids when work is this way for a time, but it shouldn't be the way it always is. Brief seasons are part of life, right? But you need to purposely restore balance and resume margin as that time passes. So building that margin in, and I feel like it's kind of ambiguous, right? I'm not giving you specifics because I can't. But you hopefully you understand the thought in your life and how to increase that margin in your life. And a good way to do that is the things that don't directly improve or go towards the priorities that are in your life. Maybe you need to stop them or minimize them or slow them down or not do them as often in order to do the things that are prioritized. And that would give you margin when you start to cut some of those things out. So, I mean, when it comes to if you're living right up to that line of exhaustion and depletion, you have to cut things. And that, I mean, that's just, and we have to be honest with ourselves, and that's hard to do because if you don't do it, who's going to do it? And that's what we think. But think about when Jesus went to heaven, how many millions of people are still sick and dying here on earth? How many people have never heard of him? Many, many, many. But he did the work he was called to do. He did the will of the Father that sent him. That's what he said he was here to do, his Father's will. And he did it. The job was completed, and it was it. He was done. He could have stayed. He could have lived to be 80. And think of all the good he could have done. But that wasn't God's will. That wasn't what God called him to do. God called him for a specific purpose, specific time, and he had to prioritize how he spent his time here doing that. And the stakes aren't as big for us, right, as far as the world. But the stakes are still big because it's your relationship with your spouse. It's your kid's life. It's raising the kids to grow up and serve God and do his will when you're not around there to do that. But scheduling margin will steward your health in a better way. It'll give you that wiggle room, that elbow room. Rest, I'm not going to go through this as much, but the first verse we read, Sabbath was made for man, not the man made for Sabbath. That means God doesn't need the Sabbath day to be honored for him. Right? God didn't put the Sabbath day in there and say, you do this because it's for me. God says, you need rest, human being. The Sabbath day is here, and I'm going to make this here so you stop and you rest. And in the Old Testament, they did it, and they did it past, and into where Jesus was there. And now Sunday is our day of rest, but we're running around like crazy. I mean, if we don't take naps, we're doing things, we're up early, we're still taking care of stuff. And I'm not saying we need a day where we're not allowed to carry anything over a certain amount of weight, right? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we need rest. It's biblical. Rest is biblical. It doesn't have to be done on the Sabbath day, but God made the idea and the purpose of Sabbath for the human beings to stop for a bit and replenish and rejuvenate. We can view sufficient rest only as a possibility once the work is done. And that's often how we think, I can only rest once. The rest I need, I can only do when I'm done with the work. But the rest is not because the work is done. The rest is because God commanded it. Right? We don't rest because the job's done. We rest because God said rest. Right? It's a command to honor the Sabbath day for us to have that rest. He created us to have need of it. Like he created our bodies to need rest. And then sin kind of exponentially increases that. Right? But we need rest. In an overloaded society, it doesn't just happen either. Right? It has to be planned. And it's not just the big vacation, right? Well, I'm going to take 2 weeks vacation here and that's my rest for the year. No, what if it's just a day after work that you go out with your wife and you rest? Maybe it's an afternoon where you take one of the kids out and you go to the playground. And you just turn everything, you turn your phone off, you don't respond to work calls, work emails. This priority is my child right now for this hour. That's rest. It doesn't always have to be laying down and sleeping, right? That rest is also important. But rest where you turn it all off and you prioritize those things that God has called you to do, and you rest and do them. You're not on your phone you've seen those dads and moms probably too, at the playground with their phone out. Yeah, pushing the kid. Oh, yeah, higher. Pretty soon they're pushing the swing and there's no kid on it. They're like, well, okay, what happened? Because they were not prioritizing. They weren't resting. They were multitasking, right? But God has instructed us to rest. So I'll finish here. The final thought I give you is in Matthew 11, Jesus offers to come to him and he will give us rest. That his yoke is light, right? His burden is light, his yoke is easy, meaning that, again, we can't do anything without him, but he's willing to do it with us. So when we rest in him, knowing that he's pulling the weight with us, man, that makes everything so much easier. And allows you to kind of let it go. We think we've got to handle it, we've got to do it. Yep, Jesus, come on, let's go. We get, all right, we're going to get through it. And really God's saying, why are you working so hard? Well, let me help you. Let go of it. Let me understand I'm here with you. Let go of the burden. Let me help you carry it. Let's go. Let's work together. And really, if you think about it, we're the really weak horse on the yoke. He's the strong ox. We're the weak horse, and we can just kind of almost pick up our feet and just be like, pretend like we're walking, those cartoons where like the one big horse is carrying the others is like, but nothing is happening. He's not contributing at all. I mean, that's a little far, but that's kind of the idea. That's what God will do for us. But we're like, nope, I got to do it. And so we're the scrawny little horse trying to pull the thing, and he's just sitting there going, you don't have to do this. Rest in me, rest in me. And that's what he's saying.